rich man aggressively confronts and humiliates a homeless beggar at a hotel entrance, but he is completely unaware that this person is Keanu Reeves, the Hollywood star himself. How did Keanu respond to this public mockery, and what consequences did the businessman's cruel behavior bring? The sun rose over the Los Angeles skyline, bathing the city in shades of gold and amber. By mid morning, soft rays of light glinted off the gleaming glass facade of the Open Heights Hotel. A taxi pulled up to its grand entrance, that steady hum of its engine blending with the bustling sounds of a city rising to a full swing. Inside sat Keanu Reeves, his face partially hidden behind dark sunglasses, a subtle yet deliberate effort to remain inconspicuous in a city where fame was as iconic as the palm trees swaying lazily in the breeze. The airport taxi came to a stop, and before Keanu could reach for the door handle, a doorman in a crisp navy uniform rushed forward. "Good morning, sir," the man said, his voice warm and professional. "Welcome to Opal Heights. Allow me to help you with your luggage." Keanu nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. As he stepped out of the taxi, the doorman efficiently retrieved his modest luggage, a single suitcase, and a worn leather backpack. As Keanu stretched, working out the kinks from the long flight, he took in the opulent entrance of the hotel. The revolving doors spun continuously, disgorging a steady stream of guests. Their excited chatter filling the morning air. Inside, the lobby was a testimony to luxury. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, casting a warm glow across the polished marble floor. The scent of fresh flowers mingled with the subtle aroma of expensive perfumes worn by the well-heeled guests. Keanu approached the reception desk, where a young woman stood, her posture perfect and her smile perfectly. As Keanu removed his sunglasses, the receptionist's eyes widened slightly in recognition. To her credit, she maintained her professional composure, though Keanu noticed the slight tremor in her hands as she began the check-in process. "Welcome to Opal Heights, Mr. Reeves," she said, her voice steady despite her obvious excitement. "We delighted to have you with us. Are you here for the lunch gala event today?" Keanu shook his head, his voice so cool and languid, in replying, "No, I'm not here for the function, just coming for some pastime and rest, a place to chill. You know, catching your breath between projects and hopefully finding some quiet days before one heads back into work." The receptionist nodded intelligently, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she had processed his check-in. "Of course, Mr. Reeves. We take pride in hosting a peaceful retreat for all our guests. I'd like to assure you of the strictest privacy policy." She launched into what was clearly a rehearsed yet very genuine explanation of how the hotel's commitment is to discretion. "Our staff is trained to uphold the utmost confidentiality, Keanu listened patiently, appreciating the hotel's efforts to cater to high-profile guests. When she finished, he said, "Thank you. That's reassuring to hear. You'd be staying in our penthouse suite," the receptionist continued, handing him a sleek key card. "It offers the utmost in privacy and comfort. Is there anything you want in the premises for just some peace and quiet?" Keanu smiled lightly. He said. The receptionist nodded, then pointed to a young man standing beside her. "James will take you to your room and help with your bags." The bellboy James moved forward, his eyes opening wide as he recognized Keanu. He was young, probably in his early 20s, and seemed to be barely containing his excitement as he carefully took charge of Keanu's luggage. "This way, Mr. Reeves," James said, leading him toward the elevators. The elevator ride was filled with comfortable silence, broken only by the soft ding as they passed each floor. James kept sneaking glances at Keanu, clearly starstruck, but professional enough not to say anything. Keanu, protected, tended not to notice, instead focusing on the changing numbers on the elevator display. Finally, they reached the penthouse floor. James led the way down a plush, carpeted hallway to a set of double doors. At the end, he used the keycard to open the door, then stood aside to let Keanu enter first. The penthouse suite was a masterpiece of luxury, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Los Angeles, the city sprawling out beneath them like a glittering tapestry. The living area was spacious, with plush furnishings and muted tones that invited relaxation. A fully stocked bar stood in one corner, while a state-of-the-art entertainment system occupied another. James brought in the luggage, placing it carefully by the bedroom door. "The bedroom is through there, sir," he said, pointing. "And the bathroom is to your right. It has a jacuzzi tub and a rain shower." Keanu nodded, taking in the opulent surroundings. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a generous tip, handing it to James. "Thank you for your help," he said warmly. James's eyes widened at the amount. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves. I hope you have a restful stay with us. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to call the front desk." After James left, Keanu took a moment to explore the suite. The bedroom was as luxurious as the living area, with a king-size bed that looked incredibly inviting. After his long journey, the bathroom was a marvel of marble and chrome, with a shower large enough for 3 people and a tub that could easily double as a small pool. Deciding a shower was in order, Keanu stripped off his travel-worn clothes and stepped into the massive shower. The hot water soothed his tired muscles, washing away the fatigue of his journey. As he stood under the spray head, could feel the tension leaving his body, replaced by a sense of calm. After his shower, Keanu changed into comfortable loungewear, soft sweatpants, and a well-worn t-shirt. He was looking forward to a quiet day of relaxation, maybe catching up on some reading or watching a movie. However, as he settled onto the plush sofa in the living area, he became aware of increasing activity in the corridor outside. Voices and footsteps filtered through his door, accompanied by the occasional burst of laughter or exclamation of excitement. The chatter seemed to be centered around the gala evening event, where the guests had discussed what they were going to wear or whom they were hoping to meet. Despite his plans to have a quiet stayover, Keanu found his curios getting piqued. He had deliberately avoided gazing into the event while making his reservation, preferring to stay detached from the Hollywood scene during his break. But now, listening to the excitement mounting outside his door, he couldn't help but wonder what all the fuss was about. After a few moments of inner conflict, Keanu made a decision that a quick stroll around the hotel couldn't harm him. He might get information concerning the event without taking too much part in it. On the other hand, it was worthwhile, he thought, to learn a bit about the layout and the amenities of the hotel. Amenities. With that decision made, Keanu stood up, slipped on a pair of comfortable sandals, and headed for the door. As he stepped out into the corridor, he was immediately enveloped in the buzz of excitement that permeated the air. As Keanu stepped out of his room and into the bustling corridor, he was immediately struck by the energy pulsing through the air. The hallway, with its plush carpeting and elegant wallpaper, was alive with activity. Guests, many of whom he recognized from various Hollywood events, were making their way toward the elevators. Their excited chatter filled the air. Keanu nodded politely to a few familiar faces. Exchanging brief greetings, he couldn't help but notice the knowing smiles and "see you later" comments directed his way. As if they all thought he had come for the party, their misconceptions only added to his inquisitiveness. After the queue of people, Keanu ended up at the grand ballroom. The room was buzzing, with the staff scurrying around, preparing for the occasion. Elaborate floral arrangements were being wheeled in on carts, their sweet fragrance combining with the freshly polished scent of wood and expensive perfume. As he stood taking in the scene, a well-dressed man approached him, his face lighting up with Recognition, Mr. Reeves, the man exclaimed, extending his hand. I'm Raymond, the event coordinator. I didn't realize you were attending. Keanu shook Raymond's hand, offering a polite smile. I'm actually just staying at the hotel, he explained it. Was curious about all the commotion. Raymond's enthusiasm didn't waver. If anything, it seemed to increase. Oh, you're in for a treat then. This is going to be the event of the year. He gestured expansively, his eyes shining with excitement. We've got the cream of Hollywood's elite here today, investors, producers, celebrities. It's all about pitching and funding the next big blockbusters. As Raymond spoke, Keanu's gaze was drawn to the numerous banners and screens adorning the area. They all the same face, a man with sharp features and a confident smile. That's that, Keanu asked, nodding towards one of the larger displays. Ah, that's Victor Prescott, Raymond explained, his voice tinged with reverence for this year's gala. He's the driving force behind everything. A tech mogul turned entertainment investor. He built his fortune with cutting-edge tech companies, and now he set his sights on dominating the entertainment industry. Raymond leaned in as if sharing a secret. His latest passion project is Titan Rising, a biopic celebrating the journey of a billionaire mogul who rises to global dominance. It's loosely based on his own life story, overcoming ordinary obstacles to achieve extraordinary success. As they talked, Raymond guided Keanu toward a table laden with books. He picked one up and handed it to Keanu. This is Victor's autobiography. It's been on the bestseller list for weeks now, and must read about his journey from poverty to billions. Keanu accepted the book politely, turning it over in his hands. The cover featured the same confident face he'd seen on the banners, along with the title From Streets to Skyscrapers. The Victor Prescott story. So, Mr. Reeves, Raymond said, his tone hopeful. Since you're here, would you like to attend the gala? I could handle your registration, right? Away, Keanu shook his head, offering an apologetic smile. I appreciate the offer, Raymond, but I'm actually here for some rest. I'm taking a break between projects. Raymond's face fell slightly, but he quickly recovered. Of course I understand. It's just, well, it's such a big opportunity. Are you sure you don't want to reconsider the networking possibilities alone? I'm sure, Keanu said firmly, but kindly, thank you. Though Raymond nodded, his disappointment evident but tempered by an effort to remain respectful. Well, if you change your mind, just let me know. Oh, and we have a private online broadcast channel for the event if you'd like. I can set it up on your phone or laptop so you can watch from your room. Consider it a favor. Keanu considered for a moment. I'll think about it, he said finally. Thank you for the information, Raymond, and for the book. As they parted ways, Keanu found himself heading towards the hotel's lobby lounge. He needed a quiet spot to process all the information he just received. The lounge, with its comfortable armchairs and subdued lighting, seemed just the best location. Becoming a couch potato in one of those cozy chairs in the corner of the lounge, Keanu went out for a new drink to wait. He kept checking how many celebrities were now actually going through the front desk checkout line. The atmosphere seemed full of electricity, with every fresh person strolling through the lobby and triggering an immediate buzz among the other employees and guests. When his drink arrived, accompanied by a complimentary petit four on a delicate china plate, Keanu thanked the server with a warm smile. He picked up one of the tiny pastries, savoring the sweet morsel as his gaze fell once again on Victor's autobiography. The book sat on the table next to his coffee, its glossy cover catching the light. Despite his initial disinterest, Keanu found himself tempted to take a peek inside. After all, he thought it couldn't possibly hurt to know a little bit more about the man behind such a huge event. With a small shrug, he picked up the book and began idly flipping through its pages while leaning back on the chair. The table of contents promised chapters detailing Victor's rise from a humble background, his first tech ventures, and his eventual takeover of the industry. Keanu started reading the first chapter, curious about the story of this self-made billionaire. However, as he neared the end of the first chapter, Keanu found his interest waning. The writing style was self-aggrandizing, filled with anecdotes that seemed designed more to impress than to inspire. With a small sigh, he closed the book, deciding he'd had enough. Settling his coffee bill by charging it to his room, Keanu prepared to go back to his quiet sanctuary. Upstairs, the lobby had become much busier in the short time he had been there, filled with the quiet ruminating of arriving guests and the occasional click of cameras of celebrities taking selfies and photographs. As he stood up to leave, Keanu found attention drawn to a commotion near the entrance of the hotel. This was intriguing, so he moved closer to see what was happening. As Keanu approached the source of the disturbance, he caught his first glimpse of Victor Prescott in person. The man's expensive suit and commanding presence matched his publicity photos. But there was something in his demeanor that the cameras hadn't captured: a hardness in his eyes, a curl of disdain at the corners of his mouth. Victor stood near the hotel's revolving entrance, his voice sharp with disgust and impatience as he berated the hotel staff and security. "This is unacceptable," he snapped, gesturing towards the courtyard outside. "I thought I made it clear that I didn't want to see any of those people hanging around the hotel during the event." Keanu followed Victor's gaze and saw a small group of homeless individuals gathered in the entrance courtyard. They seemed harmless, quietly keeping to themselves. But Victor's face was contorted with revulsion. "Sir, we've been doing our best to keep the area clear," a security guard stammered, clearly intimidated by Victor's anger. "Well, then your best isn't good enough," Victor retorted. He lowered his voice, but in the marble-flawed lobby, his words still carried clearly to where Keanu stood. "This is why we need stricter rules on who gets to hang around places like this. These people are an eyesore, a blight on our event." Keanu felt a surge of discomfort at Victor's words. He glanced around, expecting to see shock or disapproval on the faces of other guests, but to his surprise, most seemed to be deliberately looking away. A few even nodded in agreement with Victor's sentiments. Under Victor's stern direction, hotel security began clearing the entrance. Keanu watched with a growing sense of unease as the homeless individuals were roughly shepherded away from the property, their meager belongings huddled together, hastily gathered, and shoved into their arms. Victor watched the proceedings with visible disdain and muttered derogatory comments, which made Keanu's stomach churn. "Look at them," he said, to no one in particular. "No ambition, no drive. They choose to live like animals, and then expect handouts from those of us who've worked for our success." A small group of well-dressed individuals, likely Victor's associates, had gathered around him, nodding in agreement and offering their own disparaging comments. Their eagerness to please Victor was palpable, and Keanu found it deeply unsettling. As the last of the homeless were ushered away, Victor turned on his heel and strode deeper into the lobby, his entourage trailing behind him. He passed close to where Keanu stood, but didn't spare him a glance, apparently dismissing him as just another hotel guest in casual clothes. The contrast between Victor's behavior towards the homeless and his demeanor as he greeted other celebrities was stark. His charm seemed to switch on like a light, his smile wide and amiable. As he shook hands and traded pleasant with many notable names, Keanu stood there in silence, witnessing the dichotomy between Victor's public persona, the inspirational rags to riches tale he'd read of in the autobiography, and what actually lay within him. The disconnection that caused him to stir unease, that gnawed feeling that he could just walk back to his room, taking a deep breath and trying to let it all go. Keanu decided on an impulse. Instead of going towards the elevator, as he had originally thought, he turned and headed in the direction of the hotel's revolving doors. He didn't have any real plan in mind, but he knew he could not let things be this way after what he had just. As he walked out into the radiant California sunlight, Keanu was sharply aware of the comparison between the gaudy inside world of the hotel and the stark reality faced by those who had just been rousted from their homes, a memory of Victor's cruel words, and the indifference of the observers spurred him on with determination in his steps. Keanu went outside, prepared to face whatever condition he may encounter there. For Keanu entered the courtyard, the scorching midday sun momentarily blinded him as his eyes adjusted. He found himself witnessing a tense scene unfolding before him. A security guard, his face flush with frustration, was engaged in a heated argument with a homeless woman. The guard's aggressive tone and rough manner clashed sharply with the woman's quiet dignity as she protested being woken and pushed so roughly. "Look, woman," the guard was saying, his voice tight with barely contained anger. "I'm just doing my job here. It's not my duty to wake you up nicely like your mother." Would the woman, her clothes worn but clean, stood her ground? "I have as much right to be here as anyone else," she insisted, her voice trembling slightly, but remaining firm. "I wasn't bothering anyone. This is private property," the guard replied, his tone sharp. "You're not a hotel guest, so you need to move along." Their voices grew louder, cutting through the mid-morning air and drawing uncomfortable glances from passing hotel guests who quickened their pace to avoid the confrontation. Keanu watched, noting the fear and desperation in the woman's eyes, a jarring contrast to the aggressive, impatient stance of the guard. Keanu breathed deeply. He took a step forward. "Excuse me," he said in his voice so calm and carrying this undertone of authority which both the guard and the woman looked to, and the guard's eyes widened as recognition clicked. His aggressive stance slightly relaxed. "Mr. Reeves," he said with an audible tone, completely caught off balance by the actor presence. Keanu nodded acknowledgement but kept his focus on the situation at. "And I couldn't help overhearing," he said. "Is there a problem here?" The guard straightened up, trying to gain his authoritative demeanor. "Just doing my job, sir. We've had complaints about homeless people loitering in the area. I'm under orders to clear them out." Keanu turned to the woman who was watching him warily. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked gently. She nodded, her eyes flickering nervously between Keanu and the guard. I was just resting," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, as if trying to make herself as small as possible. "I didn't mean any harm. The asphalt outside was so hot and the hotel steps, they were cooler. I thought I could just sit for a moment to catch my breath, but then I fell asleep." She took a hesitant step back, clearly trying to avoid further confrontation, yet still holding her ground. Turning back to the guard, Keanu spoke in a quiet but firm tone. "I understand you have a job to do," he said, his eyes unwavering. "But surely there must be a way to deal with this in a more humane fashion. This woman is a human being deserving of dignity, no matter if she is a hotel guest or not." His voice, soothing yet forceful, had a presence that appeared to make the guard hesitate. If only for an instant. The guard shifted, uncomfortably, clearly torn between his orders and the gentle rebuke from a celebrity. I suppose I could have been more polite," he admitted reluctantly. Keanu nodded, offering a small smile. "That's all anyone can ask," said, "treating others with kindness costs us nothing but can mean everything to someone in a difficult situation." That a woman who had silently been watching this exchange then spoke up. "Thank you," she said softly to Keanu. Without another word, she stood up and began to walk away, her shoulders hunched, as if expecting further confrontation. Keanu watched her go, a mix of emotions playing across his face as she disappeared around the corner. His eyes fell on something left behind. A worn gray blanket, threadbare but clean, lying forgotten on the ground. Without hesitation, Keanu bent down and picked up The blanket, its fabric was soft from years of use, telling silent stories of hardship and survival. He looked in the direction the woman had gone, but she was already out of sight for a moment. Keanu stood there, the blanket in his hands, unsure of what to do next. He knew he couldn't leave it there. The hotel staff would likely throw it away, and he couldn't bring himself to keep it. The guard, noticing Keanu's hesitation, spoke up, his voice laced with concern and curiosity. "Would you like me to throw that away for you, sir?" he asked, eyeing the blanket distastefully. "It's not something we want lying around here." Making a quick decision, Keanu turned to the guard. "I'm going to wait here for a while," he said, his voice calm, "in case she comes back for this." The guard nodded, though his confusion was clear. He was unsure why Keanu had decided to wait there, but he appeared relieved that the situation was diffused. "Of course, Mr. Reeves, take all the time you need." As the guard retreated to his post, Keanu noticed a hot dog vendor setting up his cart near the hotel. An idea quickly formed in his mind. He walked over, bought a hot dog and a coffee, and then, with his spontaneous meal and the rescued blanket in hand, returned to the hotel's front courtyard. He said, settled down, leaning against one of the pillars close to the steps, folding the blanket into a neat square and laying it on his lap, and began to wait. His quiet presence and unspoken invitation for the woman should she return to find her. The sun clothed the late morning to greater heights and hotter degrees when Keanu sat there, sipping on his coffee, and watched as the constant flow of guests was arriving for the gala. Their designer clothes and glinting jewelry, a striking contrast to the simple blanket dappled across his lap as he sat, waiting hopefully for the woman to return. Keanu couldn't help but look upon the enormous disparity that he was witnessing: the lavish world inside the hotel and the harsh reality just beyond its doors. As Keanu finished the last bite of his hot dog, still seated casually on the front steps of the Opal Heights Hotel with his coffee, he heard the sound of expensive shoes clicking sharply against the pavement. Looking up, he saw Victor Prescott emerging from the hotel, his face set in lines of irritation. Victor's eyes scanned the area, presumably checking to ensure his earlier orders had been carried out. When his gaze landed on Keanu, his expression darkened further. In his casual clothes, with the worn blanket across his lap, Keanu was unrecognizable to him. Victor saw him only as another stubborn homeless person, an unwelcome sight in his pristine world. Victor's expensive shoes clicked sharply as he drew near, his face radiating self-righteous indignation. With every step, barely contained fury evident in every movement. "Unbelievable!" Victor exploded, his voice echoing across the courtyard. "I thought we already got rid of people like you this morning. How dare you loiter outside this hotel? Don't you have a park bench somewhere?" Keanu blinked, momentarily taken aback by the vehemence of Victor's outburst. He glanced down at himself, suddenly understanding the case of mistaken identity. Instead of correcting Victor immediately, he decided to see how the situation would unfold. Maintaining his composure, Keanu simply sipped his coffee and replied with quiet amusement, "Nice to meet you, too." His calm demeanor seemed to infuriate Victor further. "Don't you get smart with me," Victor snarled. "You people are all the same. You never get anything done since you waste your time begging instead of working. Do you have any idea who I am?" Keanu raised an eyebrow, his voice level as he responded, "I have some idea." "Yes." Victor's face contorted with rage. "Then you should know better than to hang around here. This is a respectable establishment, not a homeless shelter." As Victor's tirade continued, a small crowd began to gather, drawn by the commotion. Hotel staff hovered nervously on the periphery, carefully keeping the curious onlookers at bay, urging them to keep moving to ensure they didn't get involved. Frustrated by Keanu's lack of reaction, Victor turned to one of the nearby security guards. "You," he barked, his voice sharp and commanding, "remove this vagrant immediately. I want him off the property now." The guard hesitated, his eyes darting between Victor and Keanu. Opened his mouth to speak, likely to explain that Keanu was not in fact a vagrant, but Victor cut him. "Offa, you people are all the same, slow and wasting time. If you won't do your job, I'll do it myself," Victor snarled, his patience wearing thin. He reached out roughly, grabbing Keanu's arm in an attempt to physically force him up. Keanu, caught off guard by the sudden physical contact, managed to keep his balance and prevent his coffee from spilling. He was about to speak up to end this charade when fate intervened. In the most unexpected way, at that precise moment, a sleek black limousine pulled up to the hotel driveway. The door opened and out stepped Emma Carlson, the renowned director known for her socially conscious films She Was, followed by a small group of press members who had been tailing her limousine, their cameras ready to capture every moment. Emma's arrival couldn't have been more perfectly timed. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene before her. Up the steps to the courtyard by the entrance, she saw Victor Prescott, the man whose movie she was there to discuss, manhandling what appeared to be a homeless man on the steps of the hotel. A collective gasp rose from the gathering crowd as Emma's voice rang out clear and shocked. "Wait a minute, that is Keanu Reeves." The color drained from Victor's face as realization dawned. His hand fell from Keanu's arm, as if burnt, his expression cycling rapidly through shock, embarrassment, and panic. What Victor stammered, his earlier bravado evaporating. "Is this man a celebrity?" Keanu stood slowly, brushing off his clothes where Victor's grip had crumpled them. He turned to Victor, his voice even but pointed, as he asked, "You were saying the silence that followed was deafening?" Victor stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing without producing any sound. The crowd around them buzzed with whispers and the click of camera shutters, capturing every moment of Victor's humiliation. In that moment, as the Los Angeles sun beat down on the scene, the carefully constructed world of Victor Prescott began to crumble, and Keanu Reeves, still holding the worn blanket and his half-empty coffee cup, stood at the center of it all, a quiet testament to the power of compassion and the danger of hasty judgments. The silence that had fallen over the gathered crowd was broken by the sound of Victor clearing his throat. His face, previously flushed with anger, had now taken on a sickly pallor as he struggled to process the magnitude of his mistake. "Mr. Reeves," Victor began, his voice wavering, I had no idea. This is all a terrible misunderstanding." His eyes darted nervously between Keanu and the growing crowd, which now included newly arriving guests and a few members of the local press who had come in with Emma Carlson. Keanu stood silently, his face expressionless as he looked at Victor. "Is that," he asked quietly, "a mistake?" Victor nodded, eagerly grasping onto this chance lifeline. "Yes, of course. You see, we've had some problems with unwanted elements lingering around the hotel. I was just trying to preserve our standards, to preserve our guests." He made himself chuckle. That sounded hollow even to his own ears. "I never meant to disrespect you of all people." Keanu's gaze remained steady, his voice low but clear enough for those nearby to hear. "And if I had been one of those undesirable elements, as you put it, would that have made your behavior acceptable?" Victor's expression reddened as he noticed the cameras clicking and flashing at his face, capturing the escalating scene. He quickly turned to the nearest hotel security guard. "Remove those press," he demanded, pointing towards the reporters. "Your hotel prides itself on discretion. Get them out of here." Now his voice was strained, his desire to control the situation evident as he scrambled to protect his carefully curated public image. At the mention of the hotel's reputation, the guard moved swiftly to comply, ushering the press members away in an attempt to shield Victor from further scrutiny. Victor turned back to Keanu, now feeling safer from camera's eyes. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly for a moment before he found his voice again. "Well, that is to say," he straightened his shoulders, a hint of his earlier arrogance returning. "Mr. Reeves, you must understand that as private property, we cannot allow people just sitting here. It is not inappropriate to have some kind of standards. Your motives can be understood," Keanu replied, his tone. "Even but the way you treated another human being, the comments you made earlier, which I heard, those cannot." Excused as Victor continued to stammer through his explanations. Movement at the edge of the crowd caught Keanu's eye. The hopeless woman from earlier had returned, her eyes scanning the area, likely searching for her lost blanket. Without a word, Keanu stepped away from Victor, blanket in hand, and approached the woman. The crowd parted silently to let him pass, all eyes following his movement. "I believe this belongs to you," Keanu said gently. Holding out the blanket, the woman's eyes widened in surprise, darting between Keanu's face and the offered blanket. "Thank you again." She whispered, reaching out to take it. "I thought I'd lost it for good." Keanu smiled warmly. "I'm glad I could return it to you. I'm sorry about what happened earlier. You didn't deserve to be treated that way." As this quiet exchange took place, the contrast between Keanu's gentle demeanor and Victor's earlier behavior couldn't have been more stark. Emma Carlson, who had been watching the scene unfold with growing interest, shook her head in disbelief. "I can't believe what I'm seeing," she murmured to her assistant. "Victor Prescott, the man who's been touting his rags to riches story, treating the less fortunate like this. And Keanu Reeves," she trailed off, clearly impressed by the actor's actions. The whispers rippled through the crowd of guests and staff, comparing the two men's treatment of the homeless woman, with each retelling Victor's reputation seemed to crumble further, while admiration for Keanu grew, unable to bear the scrutiny and judgment any longer. Victor retreated into the hotel as he passed by Keanu, who was still speaking softly with the homeless woman. Victor grumbled bitingly. "Some people will do anything for attention, even pretend to care about the dregs of society." Though spoken softly, his words carried clearly in the tense silence. Keanu turned, fixing Victor with a steady gaze. "True respect isn't about public showmanship, Mr. Prescott. It's about how we treat others when we think no one is watching." Victor's face flushed anew at this pointed comment. Without another word, he disappeared into the hotel, leaving behind a buzz of conversation and whispers as the crowd began to disperse, their excited chatter filling the air with speculation about how this incident would affect Victor's upcoming projects. Keanu turned his attention back to the homeless woman. He knew that while this public confrontation might have some impact, the real work of making a difference happened away from the spotlight. As the commotion began to die down and guests made their way toward the lobby for check-in, Keanu gently guided Isabel away to a quieter space to talk. He led her into the hotel, his calm presence cutting through the buzz of whispered conversations. The curious stares from both guests and staff went unnoticed as they passed through the grand entrance, making their way toward the lobby lounge. Keanu's attention stayed firm on Isabel, his protective instincts fully engaged as they sought refuge from the chaos. Finding a quiet corner, Keanu gestured for Isabel to take a seat in one of the plush armchairs. He settled into the chair opposite her, leaning forward slightly, his posture open and attentive. "I'm Keanu," he said softly, offering a warm smile. "What's your name?" The woman clutched her recovered blanket tightly as if it were a shield. "Isabel," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Isabel Moran." Keanu nodded, his eyes kind. "Isabel, I'm sorry about what happened out there. No one deserves to be treated that way. Would you like to talk about it for a moment?" Isabel hesitated, her eyes darting around the opulent lobby as if she expected to be thrown out at any moment, but something in Keanu's gentle demeanor seemed to reassure her. I'm not used to being in places like this," she began hesitantly. "My husband, Tom, he passed away 6 months ago. We had a small apartment, nothing fancy, but it was home." Her voice cracked slightly as she continued. But there were debts I didn't know about, medical bills from his final illness. I couldn't keep up with them. Payments, and before I knew it, Keanu listened intently, his face a mask of compassion as Isabel's story unfolded. She spoke of the shock of suddenly finding herself on the streets, of the struggle to navigate a world that seemed to have no place for her. I'm new to this area, Isabel admitted her, fingers absently tracing the worn edges of her blanket. I got separated from the group I usually stay with. I was just trying to find a quiet place to rest when that guard, she trailed off. But Keanu understood the vulnerability in her eyes, spoke volumes about the fear and disorientation she must be feeling. Without fanfare or audience, Keanu made a decision. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. Isabel, he said gently, I'd like to help if you'll let me. He offered her a generous amount of cash, enough to get her temporary accommodation and fulfill any of her urgent needs. As he did, so he started explaining the places near the shelters where she could find safe accommodation in future. There is this place 3 blocks from here, he said, speaking in a practical but kind tone. They have programs to get people back up on their feet, and there, he pulled out a business card and scribbled a number on the back. This is my assistant contact information. If you need anything day or night, please don't hesitate to call. Isabel stared at the money and the card in her hands, her eyes welling with tears. But when she spoke, her voice held a note of determination that surprised Keanu. I'm grateful, truly. I am, she said, meeting his gaze. But what I really want, what I need, is a chance to work to support myself. Her fingers tightened around the card. I don't want charity. I want an opportunity to rebuild my life. Keanu nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Isabel's words resonated with him, reminding him of the importance of dignity and self-sufficiency. I understand, he said, and I respect that. How about this? Take the money for now, just to get you somewhere safe and comfortable. Tomorrow, call my assistant at this number. I'll have him look into training programs and potential job opportunities. We'll focus on finding you something sustainable, a real chance to get back on your feet. Does that sound fair? Isabel nodded, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. That sounds wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Keanu, please, he insisted gently. And you're welcome, Isabel. Everyone deserves a chance. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the bustle of the hotel lobby, a stark contrast to the quiet understanding that had formed between them. Finally, Isabel stood clutching her blanket and the lifeline Keanu had offered. I should go, she said softly. Find an accommodation or the shelter you spoke of before it gets too hot. Keanu stood up too, his face warm. Of course. Be careful and don't forget to dial that number for tomorrow. We will figure this out together. Okay, Isabel nodded, a small but real smile crossing her face. I will thank you. Keanu walked her to the hotel exit, watching as she headed in the direction of the shelter he had mentioned. As her figure disappeared around a corner, he felt a mix of emotions: concern for her immediate future, hope for what might come, and a renewed determination to make a difference where he could. With a deep breath, Keanu turned back to the hotel lobby. The day's events had taken an unexpected turn, and he knew that the ripples from his encounter with Victor Prescott were likely still spreading through the gathered Hollywood elite. As he made his way back inside, he couldn't help but wonder how the rest of this day would unfold. As Keanu re-entered the hotel, he immediately noticed the change in atmosphere. The lobby, which had earlier been filled with excited chatter about the upcoming gala, now buzzed with whispers and furtive glances in his direction. He could hear snippets of conversation as he passed his name and Victor's featuring prominently in hushed tones. Making his way through the lobby, Keanu found himself inadvertently drifting towards the event area. The elaborately decorated hall was visible through open doors, staff rushing to make final preparations banners. Bearing Victor's face, which had appeared so impressive earlier now, drew sharp looks and whispered comments from passing. Guests as Keanu paused to drink in the scene, a familiar voice hailed him. "Mr. Reeves there. You are again." Turning, he saw Raymond hurrying towards him. Carrying what looked like audiovisual equipment, the face of the event coordinator was flushed with excitement, seeming oblivious to the undercurrent of tension in the air. "I've been looking everywhere for you," Raymond said, slightly out of breath. "Listen, I know you said you weren't interested earlier, but after what happened outside, well, your presence would make quite an impact. Why don't you just get changed quickly and join the event? We can handle all the administrative details." "It's not too late." Keanu shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "I appreciate the offer, Raymond, but my answer hasn't changed. I'm here to rest." Remember, Raymond's enthusiasm dimmed slightly, but he pressed on. "Are you sure? The whole hotel is talking about you and Mr. Prescott. Your being there could really shake things up." "I'm sure," Keanu replied firmly. "But thank you for thinking of me." Raymond nodded, a hint of disappointment in his expression. But then, as if a sudden idea struck him, his demeanor brightened. "Oh, I almost forgot I have access to the private broadcast stream for the event. I can set it up for you. If you'd like, that way you can follow the event without having to be there in person." Keanu considered for a moment. He had to admit he was curious about how the incident with Victor might affect the gala. "All right," he agreed. "That sounds good." As Raymond led him to a setup desk just outside the hall to configure the stream, Keanu noticed a group of people approaching. At the center was Emma Carlson, the director he'd seen earlier, surrounded by several other influential industry figures. Emma's eyes lit up when she saw Keanu. "Mr. Reeves," she called out, her voice warm. "I'm so glad to catch you before the event starts. That was quite a scene earlier." Keanu nodded politely. "Miss Carlson, yes, it was unexpected." The group they had gathered around him, their faces a mix of curiosity and admiration. One of the producers, a man Keanu recognized but couldn't name, spoke up. "We were just discussing what happened. It's hard to believe Victor Prescott would act that way, especially given his own background. It was certainly eye-opening." Emma added, her tone thoughtful. "It makes you wonder about the disconnect between public image and private behavior in our industry." As Raymond finished setting up the stream on Keanu's phone, the conversation naturally turned to broader issues. The group of producers and directors began to talk about the need to make use of their platform and say something about the social ills they'd witnessed. Keanu, normally reticent in such gatherings, found himself being drawn into the conversation. "Maybe it's time we focus less on stories of individual success," he proposed quietly, "and more on themes of community, kindness, and humility, stories that remind us of our shared humanity." The group nodded, murmuring agreement. Emma's eyes sparkled with interest. "That's an interesting idea, Keanu. Have you ever thought of taking on more socially conscious roles?" Prior to Keanu could respond, a hush fell over the gathering. Victor Prescott had emerged from the elevator, making his way to the event hall. His earlier commanding presence seemed dwarfed as he walked, eyes forward, pointedly, not acknowledging anyone. As Victor passed by their group, his eyes briefly met Keanu. There was a moment of tension, Victor's jaw clenching as if he wanted to say something, but he remained silent, striding into the hall with his head held high, though the strain of kept himself composed was evident. Emma shrugged as Victor walked into the hall. "Beyond belief," she whispered, "not so much as an apology." The other industry folk agreed loudly, discussing their reservations for any contact with Victor's productions. Keanu did not say a word, knowing well he was an eyewitness to the dynamics change in Hollywood as they scattered towards the event hall. Emma turned to Keanu one last time. "Are you sure you won't join us?" she asked. "Your perspective would be invaluable in there." Keanu shook his head, offering a small smile. "Thank you. but I think I've caused enough excitement for one day I'll be watching from my room. Emma nodded understandingly. Well, if you change your mind, you know where to find us, and Key knew what you did today. It matters more than you would actually come to realize with that Emma and her colleagues entered the hall, leaving Keanu alone with his thoughts and the promise of an interesting live stream. Ahead, as Keanu made his way back to his room, he could feel the eyes of hotel staff and guests following him. The whispers that had started in the lobby seemed to have spread throughout the hotel, growing louder and more speculative with each retelling of the morning's events. Once in his room, Keanu settled onto the balcony, the warm afternoon sun casting long shadows across the Los Angeles skyline. He pulled out his phone, opening the private live stream Raymond had set up for him. The feed flickered to life, showing them interior of the gala hall. The camera panned across the room, capturing the glittering crowd of Hollywood's elite. Keanu could see that Emma Carlson and her coterie of industry leaders were in spirited conversation near the stage, but it was Victor Prescott who finally caught his eye. Victor stood a little to one side of the bar, a glass of something amber clutched tightly in his hand. Gone was the commanding presence from earlier in the day. Now he seemed to be trying to make himself as inconspicuous as possible, his eyes darting nervously around them. Room as Keanu watched, he saw several people approach Victor. What should have been friendly greetings turned into short, awkward exchanges. People who had been eager to speak with Victor earlier now seemed to be making excuses to cut their conversations short. The camera zoomed in on Victor's face as he attempted to engage a group of potential investors. Keanu could see the strain in Victor's smile, the desperation in his eyes as he tried to steer the conversation towards his Titan Rising project, but the investors' body language spoke volumes. They were not interested. Keanu's attention was drawn away from the screen during one of the quiet moment he decided to make an important call. He dialed Patrick, his assistant. Patrick, Keanu said when he answered, "I need your help with something important, of course." "Keanu, what do you need?" Patrick replied. "Tomorrow, a woman named Isabel Moran will be calling. I want you to help her find job training programs and employment opportunities. Can you handle that?" "Absolutely," Patrick said. "I'll make sure to take care of it when she calls. Anything else you need?" "Yes," Keanu continued, glancing back at the live stream. "Look into reputable organizations involved in addressing homelessness issues in LA. I'd like to understand how we can help in a meaningful, long-term way. I will get on it right now," Patrick assured him. "I will have some options for you to look over soon." After getting off the call, Keanu shifted his focus to the live stream of the gala. He could see how Victor was slowly fading into the background, his influence clearly declining with each passing day of events. As he continued to watch, Keanu realized that this unexpected day might be the catalyst for real change, both in Hollywood and in his own approach to using his platform for good. The event and its live stream was coming close to an end as the afternoon sun began its descent towards the horizon, casting a warmer glow over Los Angeles. Keanu remained on his balcony, eyes fixed on live stream on his phone. Emma Carlson getting out on stage. Her appearance appeared to have invigorated the space, and the camera zooms in on her face as she starts speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen," Emma began. Her voice was clear and passionate. "Today has been a day of unexpected revelations and important realization. It's made me, and I am sure that many of you, reflect on the stories we choose to tell and the values we choose to promote in our industry." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room. "We've long celebrated tales of individual success, of rising from nothing to achieve great wealth and power, but perhaps it's time we shift our perhaps we need to tell the stories that are full of compassion by the community of the quiet heroism can be found in such small acts of kindness." Keanu leaned forward, intrigued by Emma's words. He could see heads nodding in the audience, could feel the shift in energy even through the screen. "I suggest," Emma continued, "that we challenge ourselves Let's make the films that remind us of our shared humanity, that inspire us to lift each other up rather than climb over one another. Let's use our platform to make a real difference in the world." The applause that followed was thunderous. Keanu couldn't help but smile, feeling a sense of hope for the future of the industry he'd been part of for so long. As the live stream wound down, Keanu's thoughts turned to the events of the day. What had started as a simple desire for a quiet break had turned into something much more significant. He thought about Isabel, hoping that the help Patrick had arranged would be the beginning of a better chapter in her life. Man thought of Victor Prescott, whose well-crafted public mask had collapsed under the weight of his real character. As if he needed reminding of all this, true success could neither be measured in terms of wealth nor power, but only with how we treat others in our relationship with those who can hardly grant us anything in return at all. The last impressions on the live broadcast of Victor's Titan Rising poster being removed from the marquee boards, an image proof that the project had lost all its support. It was a dying, final, poignant example that hollow success constructed on arrogance and disdain for others could not exist. Because the stream ended, Keanu stood up, stretching for hours. He had been seated. He walked to the edge of the balcony, taking in the view of Los Angeles as the day's light faded into evening. City sprawled before him like tapestry of lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. He thought about the contrast between the glittering world inside the hotel and the harsh realities faced by people like Isabel just beyond its doors. It strengthened his resolve to use his position, his influence, to make a tangible difference. Keane took a deep breath of the cooling evening air. He smiled to himself, thinking that sometimes the most impactful moments in life come when we least expect them. As he turned to go back inside, Keanu felt ready for whatever challenges and opportunities tomorrow might bring, armed with a renewed commitment to using his influence for good. The day had started with him seeking peace and quiet, but it had ended with him finding something fun far more valuable, a reaffirmation of his belief in the power of kindness and humanity. And in the end, isn't that the truest measure of success?